Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I chuckled there for a moment because I turned off the air conditioner to do this intro, and it's so hot that I legitimately for a moment could not think. Yes, I've been living the last week in front of the air conditioner. It's a heat wave here in LA. Just had a nosebleed from having air constantly on my face, drying me out. Gotta moisturize. Gotta do a lot of moisturizing during a heat wave. I guess, look, if a bloody nose and just constantly living in sweat is the worst of it, then I guess I got off easy. Looking forward to the next 40 years. Anyone else have a cosmic microwave background of despair? Anyway, you know what's cure for that despair? Today's episode. Today, I am talking to musician Emily Rex and musician/filmmaker Rick Alverson, a.k.a. Lean Year. If you don't know who they are, why don't I read you their bio right now? As a musical duo, Emily and Rick have been making music together for a number of years, and their first self-titled album was released in 2017 to acclaim from publications like Pitchfork and NPR Music. In addition to their musical work, Rick is also a lauded indie film director whose movies include the comedy starring Tim Heidecker and The Mountain starring Jeff Goldblum. Lean Year's latest album, Size, was just released on Western Vinyl, and it's great. I was worried a bit about this conversation. Rick is a intimidating filmmaker, but I gotta say, both he and Emily were incredibly friendly and open. I really love talking to them. The new album is really quite wonderful, so I hope you like this episode. If you do, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. I've been doing this for 12 years. You should check out the back catalog. I've talked to hundreds of filmmakers and actors and musicians and artists and comedians and all other kinds of folks from different creative walks of life. If you're on social media, I'm at Andy Beckerman on both Twitter and Instagram. And what else? What else is imperative in this intro? I'll tease some episodes that are coming up. Talk to Laura Veers, Dear Nora, aka Katie Davidson. That was great. Kieran Gillen, wonderful comics writer. You might know from Young Avengers, Wiccan the Divine, a lot of X-Men stuff, including the recent X-Men Avengers Eternals crossover. That was a wonderful talk, too. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Emily and Rick. As a control freak, it's one of those things, maybe it's therapeutic, I don't know, but where I'm just like, just have to let go and let God and just hope this all works out recording wise.
It's like ballroom dancing.
How so?
You just get out there and all eyes are on you and you just let it fly.
Sorry, go on with the metaphor, because I'm not good at dancing at all. I've uncoordinated as the day is long. So have you done that, or is that literally just
we are ballroom dancers?
It's best not to indulge him in these kinds of things, because you're in the beating of the dead horse now.
It'll cascade into
to use a violent metaphor. But
no. I mean, that's my corner of humor, is being a dead horse. So
we're in good company then.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Wait, how long have you guys been together?
70 years.
Maybe
what anniversary is that?
This is 71.
We met in 2010, and we've been together pretty much since we met.
Yeah.
2010. So
12 years.
Because I don't talk to more than one person on the show very often, and especially couples. Because of that, I don't talk to couples very often. And I'm curious if you guys how familiar you are with each other's childhoods. Like, how much do you know about each other's childhood?
As much as we have disclosed to one another.
We'll see if there's any new reveals today.
Yeah, that's what I'm
curious
about.
Yeah.
I think we're both fascinated a bit with each other's childhoods.
Yeah, we have really different. I mean, there are some ways in which, they were very similar, but there are a lot of ways in which they were very different. And I think in ways that both of us really identify kind of like key moments or aspects of our lives or our childhoods that really informed who we are as adults. They're in those ways, those kind of keystone features of our childhoods. Those feel really different. Yeah.
Like in what way? Do you mind if I ask?
No, I mean, I would just say I would say my parents' divorce was like one of the most foundational, formative moments of my life. And his parents were married for 53 years. And he grew up in a really kind of traditional religious household. I grew up in my mom was very spiritual background, but I guess,
but an unorthodox, really more sort of new age kind of modern spirituality, and mine was a very antiquated Catholic upbringing.
So I think that in kind of like big ways like that, where you would say, this was a feature of my childhood that really shaped who I am, maybe.
Rick, do you mind if I ask, like in terms of Catholicism, was it just like rule based? This is the thing I always ask with religion. I'm curious if are people raised in just a rule based kind of household, or are they raised in a household where there's something deeper, where there's more of a feeling about the religion that kind of permeates everything?
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, we went to, Catholic grade school and high school. And I went to church till I was 17. After even during a period of exploration, shall we call it, and doubt and disenfranchisement from the whole enterprise, because it was so foundational to my mom had me when she was 43, and her mom had her when she was older, and so and we grew up outside of Philadelphia, which was a very dogmatic, old catechism style Catholicism, Italian Catholicism. Mm-hmm. And it was sort of an underpinning of everything but it was less on the surface. But it was something that my mom was, it was really, really foundational for her. And so it was, it riddled and supported everything for us as kids, me and my sister.
Sorry, I was about to ask, was there a positive side to it? But I don't think you said anything that was like technically negative. I just always assume, as someone who's not a fan of religion in general, I just always assume that it's like being raised in a household where it's like I was raised Jewish, but it was kind of just like we were Reformed Jews, and the only thing that really got in me was the ethical stuff, which I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'm down with that part of it. But like, were there positives or negatives? Like, where do you end up on that?
The Catholic guilt thing is very real. And also this entire sort of structural underpinning for hierarchy and all of a lot of problems that me and Emily jointly see in the world, and that, irk and haunt us are, this idea that we're moving towards something, and that it's there's no sort of favoring of the moment. It's all that we're in this sort of guarded conditional ascendancy, and that there are gatekeepers, and everything is about tomorrow, which is also a very capitalist kind of oddly capitalist way of looking at the world, but it's very much Catholic also.
Yeah, and very like Enlightenment, just in like a general broad sense of like Whiggish history and stuff like that.
Progress.
Yeah, which then it's funny to me. I've been writing about this a lot lately. The actual like feeling of that died in World War I. Like what people really believed in it was like up to World War I, and then the idea of progress, like just leading to mass slaughter, kind of like killed it in most people's heads, but we're still in this zombie kind of interregnum period. Like nothing else has taken over, but we're still like, oh yeah, the more rational we are, the better our society is going to be. And that's
funny because
around.
The progress of the late mid-century and the latter part of the 20th century, I mean, that whole idea, the suburban kind of, the safety progress, the sort of sequestration kind of thing. I mean, that's what my parents were part of. And that's what I grew up at, in a cul-de-sac, in the incarceration of suburbia.
Yeah. Me too.
Cultural. I mean, it's stripped of cultural commerce and,
Yeah. I'm from Reading, Pennsylvania. So I know that kind of feeling.
Yeah. We used to go to Reading because you guys had all the outlets.
Mm-hmm.
We'd go out there and get our cheap shoes, cheap jackets. A lot of outlets.
Yeah. Where you go school shopping for school clothes.
Textbooks. Yeah. God bless you.
So, Emily, it seems though when you said new agey that I associate with more amorphous kind of ways of understanding the world, or I'll just go with amorphous, inchoate, something like that. And I'm curious if that is accurate for your upbringing, or how like your own, I don't want to say spiritual, but maybe, I don't know, you categorize how when I was about to say spiritual development, and then I stopped myself because I'm like, well, I don't know if that really applies to you, but.
Yeah. I would say, my mom is a deeply spiritually curious person. And so is my dad. When they met the first day of medical school, and my mom was living in an ashram. She had been living in an ashram for years. I actually don't know how far she was in at that point, but she lived in an ashram for a total of 8 years. And she had already had sort of a series of spiritual teachers at that point. And then, peppered through the period of time that my parents were still married was like a really kind of wide array of different spiritual engagements, like color therapy, chromotherapy, rebirthing. They did this thing called loving relationships training for a while. They were really involved in Course in Miracles, which is like obviously much more Christian kind of leaning text. And then, a part of their eventual separation was her pretty strong devotion to a group called Dennis Adams Fellowship, which really only had like 300 members or something. But this one very charismatic guy named Dennis Adams. She was with him. She was with that group for 19 years. So throughout most of my childhood.
I don't know if you would mention this, but I mean, they made pilgrimages, for lack of a better word, to Mount Shasta in Northern California, which was seen as like one of the pillars of New Age geology from Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists.
Oh, wow.
The
Lumerians and
the Lumerians were the spiritually enlightened race that lived inside of the mountain, and it's fascinating. I mean, it's so, as you can see, it's so divorced from the sort of structurally antiseptic, Catholic history.
Well, and then sometimes we would like go to my dad's house and we would like go to the Methodist church. And that was like my only like kind of window into what other folks were doing. But on my mom's side of the equation, it permeated everything in our lives, like the sort of spiritual philosophy behind Dennis's work. And it really was kind of like an amalgam of what he was really interested in that moment, but it definitely had some Judeo-Christian elements, but also very kind of like some Buddhist elements. And yeah,
it's funny because like when I started to sort of look into the canonical and non-canonical gospels and the Council of Nicaea and all of this sort of stuff, and essentially fell on the side of the atheists. I was first drawn into all kinds of occult kind of stuff in my late teens, and there's a lot of similarities, and it's very much dovetails off of the world that M's mom and a little bit of her dad that were in. I mean,
he's got a lot of connective tissue with my mom.
Yeah, I mean, I was familiar with Course in Miracles then, but I was more into like Das Energy and Richard Bach illusions and this sort of stuff. And these are conversations that me and M's mom can
you go deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is interesting that like when you start to like dig into the apocrypha of different religions, it all kind of seems similar in some way. Like once you actually like go into like either Judaism or Christianity into the mysticism part of it, then you see these connections. But something that I thought was really interesting. I don't know if it is, but I'll pick it apart and see if there's something there. Is that there is something very peculiar about like that kind of American mysticism. If you're going back to like the Theosophists, like there's something very particular about that versus Rick, who grew up in this kind of with these connections going back thousands of years to something more ancient. And I'm wondering if that, the best word I can think of is infects you in some way, infects your spirit, shapes your existential journey in some way. I don't know if there's anything there, but it just strikes me as something interesting that there are these two, like, it would be the same thing, Emily, if you were like Mormon, where I would think like, oh, there's something very particular, like American about that versus
incredibly American.
I think it's incredibly American. And I mean, I've struggled with depression a lot in my life. And I think, there's something about the new age kind of like movements or those spiritual tendencies. I think that, I think it would be fair to my mom and my stepdad, whom she met through that group and is now with still, to say that it's very individualistic. And, I think for that reason, probably much more aligned with capitalism. And I think a lot of the ways that spirituality manifested in our, lives as children was, like if you were in a situation, it was your responsibility to try and understand how you created that situation in order to learn something from it. And, I think as a kid, there's I'm sure some parts to that are positive, and there's some autonomy there, and there are interesting parts of that, but there are also parts of that, if you experience depression, that you can really start to internalize what's going on around you as your responsibility, your fault, especially if you're at the center of, what for me and my sister was a pretty tough divorce. So, I mean, I think there was just to be, real about it. I think that certainly was, that individualistic quality of it did definitely permeate, my ability to kind of see myself and who I was in the world and who I was really in relationship to the people around me as a kid.
It's funny because I mean, they're almost inversions of one another, but there's a similarity between the traditional ordering of Catholic kind of psychology and what she's talking about, insofar as that the individual is core to the practice of the quote unquote religion. In Emily's case, it's that was being raised in a world in an environment of a world building, where essentially they could shape and transform and manifest conditions, and were solely responsible for that manifestation and perceptive kind of like interference. And in mine, it was sort of like essentially if you err on the side of, so everything is about if you were to make a mistake, sin, fracture this conformity of goodness and the venial and mortal sort of laws and conditions of the religion, then you were uniquely responsible for your own damnation. So it's a completely narcissistic sense. I remember when I first became, felt as though I were an atheist and that there wasn't a deity, an omnipotent, omnipresent deity, like essentially with eyes glued on me, that I felt completely relieved that the universe I was just another, speck of dust in a beautifully uncaring, massive ornate vehicle.
I really do think that has been like one thing that we have both spoken about that has been such a salve to our depression, is really just basking in our insignificance.
Yeah.
And that is a complete response to this deeply, like you're saying, deeply individualistic, very American character of my experience. But, similarly, anything that puts you at the soul center of, in my case, like being able to create literally the world around you. But in Rick's case, obviously his eternal damnation is also valuable, or his
just pending, the idea of damnation. The eyes of God upon you is very, very troubling, sort of voyeuristic, the great voyeurism of the deity.
Yeah, but can you always discharge that responsibility through confession? Again, I'm walking out into waters I really don't understand but
confession can operate as a as a restart, but then you step outside of the booth and just all of the sort of errant enterprises in your mind are active again, and you're just back again. They've got you on the hook. You need to keep getting washed again. Plus, we grew up the Baltimore Catechism, which is I'm dying to get on, I don't know where, eBay or something, and find an old copy of it, because it was an unaltered spiritual guidebook that was in the Diocese of Philadelphia in the mid 80s, that was unchanged from 1952. And the illustrations and the idea that of the contours of purgatory and the mortal and venial sins, and which are forgivable and which are not, a mortal sin at the time, and the church has sort of vacillated on this, was an unforgivable infraction. You can't just go commit murder and you can confess it, but I mean at that time you had, and there are many other less problematic mortal sins that were in the catechism, but it's not as convenient as just walking into that creepy little booth.
But what's interesting too, though, is that like both Rick and I have struggled with some obsessive compulsive tendencies since we were kids, and
similar
ways. Yeah. And pending unforgivable sin, there is something deeply obsessive about, forgive me for saying this, but like the confession, like you're literally going back over and over and over again, and and purging. And there was something very similar to that for me, like of this sort of the deep stress of feeling like anything that I could do could sort of create a situation that could be negative for me or anyone else around me. It does sort of create this very self-reflective kind of checking, motion to it.
Essentially, it's the feeling responsible for everything, all of the conditions of the world, and
right.
that they're essentially on your shoulders. I think both of us had that, and that can lend itself to really profound obsessive compulsive conduct.
Disorderly conduct.
Well, okay. Hold on. I'm trying to order these questions in my head because I have.
Sorry, we're going like.
No, this is quick. Great. But let me just ask this one. and then I'll come back to some of the OCD stuff because I think that's really interesting. When you're part of a religion and you actually believe it, you're not just going because you have to go, right? I'm assuming this because I never felt it, but you feel connected to something larger than yourself on a deeper level than someone who just like follows the rules. That's why I started asking about like, is it just rules based or is there a deeper feeling of faith in you when you were going?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious, like once you said you found solace in realizing that you're just like a speck in a cold, uncaring universe. But I think this feeling I've never had, I think I would miss that if I left it. And I'm wondering if you had problems in kind of moving into this kind of like more scientific consciousness, I'll call it, for lack of a better term.
I mean, me personally, like I said, I moved through the occult, obsessive sort of deeply, darkly occult practices and behaviors, and into a more secular, truly sort of secular space. But I found a connectivity to the experience of the spiritual experience of a belief in I don't know. I mean, it's just like, I almost had like it's a weird Protestant more type Catholicism, or there's something more akin to some of the, I read a lot about the saints and this sort of thing, but I felt like I wasn't very convinced about the priest being a true interlocutor. I believed that I had a personal connection to Jesus. But the one that frightened me also. But I think both of us, both me and Em, we've talked about it. And I mean, this idea of the limitations of the world around us and the conditions, the experiential conditions of the world. That it's absolutely perfect and beautiful, and like that it is a spiritual engagement or an equivalent, you know what I mean? Essentially that you can be in a state of bliss by putting your hand on a table, I mean, these are and I think that a lot of the subject matter of our music and our work is this idea of celebrating and leaning into this sort of counterweight to all of the aspirational models that the world is a limited, beautifully limited, articulated space, and it's full of failure. I mean, every year the reason your hand has actual structure to it is because there's a failure on the atomic level of and the cessation of something. These are ends. Everything that we see around us is a beautiful end. So I think that there's a lot of there's a lot of the spiritual in the practical and the utilitarian.
I have no doubt too, though, that there is that peace that a lot of people feel in those spaces. I didn't ever experience that because I wasn't in a space that was similar to that. And I mean, I think it's like one of the primary questions of a secular society, right? Like, what does our being in the world and our happiness and our sense of, willingness to move forward together look like if we don't have that something there that's tying us together? I mean, we talk a lot about, kind of like, what does it mean to be, adults living in trying to be in more intentionally in community with other people, and is there a set of kind of like secularly spiritual values that kind of pull us together and are a bit of that glue? Obviously we all have ways that we want to interact with each other, and certainly those are probably more tacit for most people. But I mean, there's
a huge structural vacuum. I mean, there's on the left in the progressive secular space. There is no equivalent of the church, and that's a real problem and a shortcoming in progressive intelligence, frankly, I made a movie because I'm also a filmmaker, and I made a movie called New Jerusalem, and went into these very modern evangelical churches on the south side of Richmond, Virginia, and you essentially saw grown men very much in the masculine mode in a community space, crying in front of one another. It provided an antidote to all of the rigid gender and all of the norms of the secular world in this space that was built on community and and really that seemed to be like what was happening there, and there is nothing like that with the exception of, well, gosh, I guess therapy, but that isn't a community experience. It should be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that is the thing I've been thinking through is, okay, so the Enlightenment dies in World War I. And before that, the Enlightenment wipes out the idea of wonder, right? And the secularization of the globe then kind of wipes out this kind of like deeper feeling, right? So then the next movement in this dialectic should be something that combines both wonder and a rationality in a new way, right? We don't have it yet. Whatever it is, if humanity even survives, whatever happens.
We should just say that the arts are a literal of literal value in that sense, and that's why we're drawn to them. It is a sacred space where essentially you are communing with a practice or a form, and it provides that sense of wonder and awe and the inarticulate nature that is the equivalent of the religious experience. When you're in front of a Rothko, or when you listen to a particular piece of music, or whether you're the author or the recipient of this exchange. It is the equivalent of that in my experience.
Yeah, for real. The aura of an artwork, like being in the presence of that aura, is the same. Or not the same, but I will say it is a similar feeling to being in the presence of a deeply religious artifact. There is a similarity. I've said this a bunch of times on the show before, but like I went to the tomb of St. Francis once, and even as a non-believer, I could feel something in that room. And it's the same. It's related to the feeling of being in front of a deeply meaningful artwork. So
look at old cathedrals. You're walking into a literal artwork, an architectural, typically an astonishing architectural environment, and full of frescoes or the equivalent thereof. You're surrounded by artistic engagement with the world and practice.
I think there's also a really pretty incredible set of thinkers who are engaging with what kind of a nature informed philosophy of and I think people have different ways of putting it, but experience of the secular and and of the moment, right? So if you acknowledge, just acknowledging that at the simplest level, right, that there's no afterlife, puts you in the present and supports you in experiencing a level of awe about the present and about the finite amount of time that we all have on this planet, and about the true beauty of then leaving and allowing someone else or something else to inherit that is, I think, actually extremely challenging to everything that we have been taught about and the entire way, obviously, that our society and economy works, but is fundamentally the way that nature works. And obviously the decisions that we make now can foreclose on other individuals, we're in a very deep conversation with how our decisions are potentially foreclosing on future generations' ability to have that same finite amount of time on this planet. But I do think that, that is an incredibly powerful way to try to engage with the very short amount of time that we have.
It's difficult to be done because, I mean, the progressive, secular, space of modern society, even for people who are sort of recreationally or traditionally sort of religious, but not really religious. I mean, the idea of ritual has disappeared. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is intricately woven into, every Homo sapien exchange with the natural world and life, from the dawn of time, and when now we've just sort of disposed of it all, and it's a necessary sort of, that feels like practice. You know what I mean? It's very much like when you're interacting with a medium in the arts, or like I love Christmas. I mean, I grew up loving Christmas. It feels like the community exchange of it, and the gathering and this sort of stuff, and the ritual of all of that is deeply important to me. But it's something that, I don't know, increasingly that we're losing.
I think in favor of, going back to what you were saying at the very beginning, the true zombie that won't die that Trump and the right keeps trying to reanimate is this idea of American utopianism, right? And it's a pretty inconsistent with any ability to continue to live on this planet in a sustainable way, you know? And so if you are unwilling to let go of that, and I think even the progressives on the left, in some ways, we're unwilling to let go of that, mm-hmm. Not true progressives,
the unlimited
progressives, but just
the unlimited opportunities, the boundless progress that's possible. That there's go, no end to.
We're also reanimating that zombie.
Yeah, I wrote a thing on this a little while ago where I'm like, what are we willing to give up? Yeah. And that's the question. It's like, if we're not willing to give up everything in order to possibly move on to, again, I don't know what the answer is. I really like that idea of the aesthetic paradigm is the combination, is the in some kind of vulgar Hegelian understanding of it, the next move in this dialectic. But
we're only willing to give up leaders who ask us to give something up. I mean, it's so counterintuitive to the individualistic nature of the American spirit. I mean, it is the polar opposite of that. The idea of the limited universe is not American. It is not freedom. When they say freedom, they mean a boundless opportunity and endless resources. I mean, it is an obscene crime that we have committed with our psychology against the natural world. Yeah, and we outsource. Against ourselves. But this is also something we outsource with all of our utopian sort of, hope. Yeah, I mean, pessimism can be a beautiful constraint, and we need more of it.
Emily, were there rituals? I'm stuck on this idea of rituals now too, because I'm thinking about creativity and rituals, and I want to ask a question about that. But I want to ask: were there any rituals that went along with this New Age spirituality you were raised in, or maybe you got it from your father? You said visiting a Methodist church.
I mean, I think it depends on which one of those kind of strands of. I mean, a lot of the things that we did when we were growing up were very, I don't know. It's hard to say what's a ritual, right? But
rebirthing is
I think there's the things that I'm thinking of are the things that were deeply physical in nature. Rebirthing, you literally go through, you're reenacting, your own birth
with your mother.
Many people did not have their mothers present. I was one of the only children.
Describe
what I remember of it, and I'm sure folks can fact check all this, but what I remember of it is, so you basically kind of at the center of the experience is your birth story, and then you are basically there's trauma obviously related to any birth, right? Both for the mother and the child. It's very child centric. So you're dealing with your own experience being born, which is interesting. And I have not thought enough about, but you basically you reenact physically being born in a positive way.
But what does that look like with the group of people?
There are physically people around you, and they kind of create a birth canal, and you move through physically the birth canal,
reenacting
emerge
the physical events.
Yeah, literally as a reborn, kind of a positively reborn, having worked through that trauma by sort of reframing the negativity of it in a positive way through this community of people that are sort of supporting you. And even to this day, when my sister and I are talking to my mom about, something that's happened or just, kind of catching up, she will refer back to our birth stories as a way of helping us understand, how it is we should interpret something that we went through, or why we're experiencing in a certain way. So I think there were a lot of things like that. The chromotherapy obviously had a lot of ritual to it. It was all about, changing the structure of, we did it with water quite a bit. And then, my mom had a lot of these, she would go away to this 40-day, summer camp in the summer, and they would have all, teachings and all kinds of things that they did out in Mount Shasta. So I'm sure there was a ton of ritual to that I don't even know about.
Is there any significance to it being 40? I'm sorry. I'm just like, there's so much consonance.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
And the idea of also like being born again, there's like consonance there. And I assume it's on purpose, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, I actually don't know enough about rebirthing to know how much of it has kind of like a Christian influence to it. But
I mean, these are all sort of just iterations of a single impulse. I mean, even like, it's so fascinating. I mean, even look at, Mormonism, Joseph Smith, and sort of like this, essentially this lap joint into the Christian sort of, history and tradition, in this shift and this change. And I mean, I think that there's definitely a lot of like the Protestant ethic in a way in the New Age space, insofar as that everybody's Jesus. Everybody essentially has the capacity to be a deity. Which is so American and similar in some ways to Mormonism.
Yeah. So the thing I was thinking of with these rituals is that if there is again, this is all so speculative, but if there is another a movement in this, and it is an aesthetic movement, right, where it is somehow this idea of like, we are surrounded by, this is the dumb way of saying it, but like creativity, where that becomes something paramount in all of our lives, as opposed to just making things for profit, right? And constantly increasing profit. The idea of ritual is very important in that, right? And I'm curious how, if your own creativity, both as musicians or as a filmmaker, if you see parallels or you see like precursors of how you create in the kind of spiritual or religious ways you were raised.
I mean, I get concerned with this idea that, I mean, I'm obsessed a little bit about the practical nature of artistic engagement, like what is possible in a space where there's a glut of content and essentially everybody is producing this content. What is the content doing? What kind of function does it have? Because there's I mean, if everybody is in sort of this creative utopia where we're essentially just in expression bubbles and sort of living in this pseudo spiritual creative, state, somebody's laboring so that we can do that. If we're not creating a functional, if there isn't some sort of utilitarian component, even conceptually, to our work, it feels gratuitous. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's something that, and it's a little more difficult with music, because music's so comforting, and it feels, to that degree, the utility is really evident. But yeah.
I mean, I think that there's kind of an intellectual idea about, we got to make a record. It's time to make a record again, right? And that kind of gets you in the room. And then the good thing that happens is that you get to play music, and that is a conversation between us, which we're lucky to have, and obviously our co-conspirator Eric and everyone else. We get the Matt, who plays drums with us sometimes, like everybody that we get to be in conversation with. But the very cool thing about it, which reminds me of what you were just saying, Rick, is just this, it is utilitarian in that it uses your body in order mm-hmm. to do that. And that melding of being like an emotional and an intellectual and a deeply bodily experience is like, again, we're atheists, but like it feels very spiritual, and that's in some ways, then the ritual itself is just sitting down and playing the music, right? That alone is its version of like grounding and melding and showing those different parts of like being a living person in the world, or a living anything in the world, like what the relationship is between those different things to each other, I guess. Is that too esoteric? I don't know. But
I think we've been living in the esoteric most of this time. So
okay, cool.
I'm just trying to like put together the way you talk about that. It makes me think, like, when I'm writing, mm-hmm. sometimes it is just this kind of like mechanical, I have to write. Mm-hmm. Like I have to put this, I owe a script to someone and they are paying me, and I need that money to buy groceries and to get medicine for my cats and things like that. And I'm mm-hmm. miming typing. I don't know why I'm doing that as we're talking, but there is so there's a practical impulse to it, but the actual act of like making something that like is flowing out of me and that I want and that I need to express, it creates a state that I think is similar to what you said. Like I'm not a spiritual or religious person at all, but what I think you are saying with that spirituality. Right. Am I getting it right? Am I describing it correctly?
Yeah. And I mean, like, I guess maybe we can de-emphasize the term spirituality, because I'm not even sure what that is. Right. Like, but to us, it's something that's like meaningful and special and feels outside of the kind of realm of like, I've intellectualized this into being, right. It's like, it feels like something that is synergistic at the intersection of these very special kind of factors kind of coming together.
Also, it's like, apart from the whole just cold procedural kind of transactional mode of typical work, I mean, and that's the great fortune about it. I mean, it's frivolous in that nature because it doesn't look on paper like you're doing something that is in the space of commodity, Mm-hmm. And tragically, the majority of people in the States, particularly, I mean, they're that transactional mode of what you do for labor is not something that you're invested in that equivalent spiritual kind of space. It's been removed from that. Essentially, we're taught to kind of hate work and tolerate work, and that makes us kind of uncritical workers, which that folks love. The consumer model loves a worker who isn't really critical or engaged with their work, because they just do it. Yeah, you got to do it. It's just work. Great. That's a good worker.
Yeah. Well, how's he supposed to exploit people?
Marx would love that shit.
But when you were younger, is this the
Sarcastic.
attitude you had towards making things? Like, what were your first creative acts? Either when you were kids or teenagers, whatever you want to count as like creative acts.
Rick has some good ones.
I do.
Yeah, you had like we have this awesome, he had a business card. Well, speaking of commodification.
Yeah, I was an early entrepreneur.
He used to
At an
paint.
illegal company in high school, reproducing copyrighted album covers on the back of jean jackets.
It was very sweet. But you used
sold them for
to
a lot
love
of
to
money.
draw.
Yeah, no, I was a drawer. You know, I was one of these drawer kids that was compulsively drew and loved drawing and was sort of known as the drawer. People want me to draw them. And that started pretty early, that sort of doodling.
I went to this pretty insane elementary school called the Children's House. It was a Montessori school, and it was tiny. Like, it was run by this woman who was just like a powerhouse, incredible, like, education, justice advocate. She's just like incredible. Louise Brandon, she passed away a couple years ago. But she, like, at one point we had like 28 kids from kindergarten to 8th grade. It was in this like little house in the middle of Indianapolis on like 3 acres of land. And so there was like one teacher for every subject for all grades. So you would get up in the morning, you would like make a contract about what you were going to do for that day. And you would go to those classes. And like until I was 10, I only had to go to reading and math like 3 times a week. But the art teacher, Sally Ben Hamida, most amazing woman ever, she was just such a badass. And I would go and I would spend like hours in art class, a day. She was like my mom and my therapist, and she had this awesome summer camp called Tick Valley Camp. So, I mean, she just had us doing all kinds of craziness in there, and for a lot of kids in school, it's just like we spent a huge amount of time in art class every day.
Because I guess that, one of the big things that I talk about on the show is like, so many people have artistic impulses, but then it gets either snuffed out or somehow throughout their life, it just gets, other things get in the way, whatever, or they never develop it. And so I'm very curious, when I talk to people on the show, how did you keep that alive throughout your life? To then make art objects, to make films, to make albums, to write music. Like, what was it about your lives that allowed you to, or your existential makeups or whatever, right, that allowed you to carry this into adulthood?
I mean, from my experience and my perspective of many quote unquote artists that I know are people who engage in the arts, is that there's a certain misfit quality to a lot of these folks, myself included, that essentially there's something in the individual that doesn't fit into the space of this other sort of transactional thing that we're talking about, and an unsatisfied kind of problematic, unresolved sort of impulse, and that often is accompanied by a kind of like awkward nature in those more traditional spaces. I only ever felt at home around these other sort of misfits. And completely liberated by certain films and music. I mean, that changed my life because it showed me an alternative. It was a counterweight to this sort of promotional, bullshit of the conformed sort of normal space.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've always been kind of honestly at odds with it. It doesn't mean that kind of creativity didn't make its way into the other kinds of things that I do for work. I think it certainly does. I was like a grade school teacher for a while, and I worked for the university, and now I'm a consultant. So, I mean, I think that creativity is a part of everything that I do, but I think our relationship has been about Rick kind of prodding me into giving myself permission to allow that to be a part of my life again.
Yeah, I'm an evangelist for the misfits.
Evangelist.
And when I say that, I mean the band.
Yeah.
Sure,
yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I took it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, why weren't you giving yourself permission before that? I mean, I can guess because I've done that to myself too, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think I had a lot of, I think it kind of goes back to my parents and my divorce. I have a really strong, my dad is like a really strong influence in my life. And he's kind of like as sort of straight and narrow. I think in his heart, he is a misfit, but like, he didn't get to hang out with them. I just think that whether there were expectations of me or I supplanted expectations on myself, like art and creativity was just not something. It was like there were very small punctuated moments, I think, of my adult life when I allowed it in, and it's always been life-giving. I mean, in some ways, I think that's probably why it does feel even more secularly spiritual to me now, because it is, when you do engage with it and you do get to be there with it, it's so magical, and, but I struggle with allowing myself to, to allow it to have that legitimacy that it needs to have, and also just like to take myself seriously with it, because I think there's an element of that too,
And I mean, in the broader America, I mean, art as we know it is delegitimized. It is all about it is the sort of transactional, decorative, event that it's sort of like, well, the value of this thing is that if it's nice and it makes me feel good and it validates me and it has a place in my living room that complements my carpet. I mean, the problematic nature of art that is actually the nourishing, work in the space and that changes the shape of culture and civilization is, I think, purposely delegitimized and moved to the side because it's the space of revolution,
legitimized and co-opted.
Sure, yeah,
well, turned into content.
Totally, yeah. The Urban Outfittersification of anything meaningful and radical.
Yeah, it's interesting that you guys say that, because whenever I encounter like very meaningful artworks, whether it's like, a painting or a film or a book, it actually is kind of painful. And I think it is because of being raised. And I think over time, I've kind of like been able to analyze and figure out how capitalism, and I hate saying it because it makes me sound like
communist.
Me sound like I'm just like some like weird leftist ranting on a sidewalk somewhere. But I mean, like, we were all raised in capitalism in America, and after the 90s, the globe, right? And so it gets that the structures of it get inside you, and it takes a while to kind of deprogram yourself from that if you want
100%.
to, if you have the space. And this is when you talk about misfits. To me, the idea of being a misfit, I look a lot for that kind of stuff on this show, because I think the space between you and then the rest of the people that you are a misfit from, I think that tension between you is where this stuff comes from, is where you get the space to like look at culture and then comment on it in whatever your particular art form is.
Yeah, I mean, that might be a value of that sort of engagement with the arts.
Yeah,
the contribution that becomes a commerce with somebody or a thorn in the side or a splinter in the shoe. I mean, that's all. That there is value in that. Yeah, it is a mission statement. We have a duty to disrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that idea, like this, like meaningfulness, like if you just being in the face of it is painful for me, because I've been raised in such a way where it's just like, no, you just put a price tag on that thing and then you sell it, or you, whatever. It's just like, again, like you said, Emily, the Urban Outfitterization of it, right? It's just a thing to put in your, like, I chose, like the art that's behind me, I picked I chose all that stuff because I felt something seeing it, not because I thought it worked well on the walls or something like that.
Right. And I think that gets to sort of like some of the deeper themes in Rick's approach to his filmmaking too. And I think the kind of ongoing war he's been waging for the last, 10 years around passivity in film, what it means to truly make a piece of, of art, obviously in the form of film that challenges the viewer.
Right.
At a time when entertainment has become so commodified that we all have expectations for the passivity we will experience and the comfort we will experience when we engage with it.
And the control to disengage, that is increasingly sort of made more and more readily available.
Yeah, because there's nothing more notable. There's no bigger signifier for me of the commodification of art, and especially film and movies, TV, than, people's abdication of any responsibility around the educational role that it's playing in our lives, right?
Yeah.
When we let go of the true notion, I mean, of course we've got a public education, everything like this, right? And I'm a huge advocate of all of it, but, our children are learning way more from television and media than they are in school.
I mean, Hollywood has spoiled and despoiled an entire nation insofar as that it has enabled us to believe that we are these sort of, like central players in a world, and we really don't have to put up with anything. So if you see something or engage with something that rubs you the wrong way, or essentially, isn't essentially, tickling that funny bone or whatever, you just disengage. It's like, I don't have to put up with this. People would say, it's like, I don't have to put up with this. And the world doesn't work that way. You carry those instincts and into the street, and you say, I don't have to put up with that. I don't need to deal with that. I'm not going to contend with this. And it just destroys empathy. And it also is the classic sort of signifier of a plateauing culture. Well, culture that is stagnating because there's no new light coming in. Everybody's little hall of mirrors. There's no new information coming, no new stimuli.
Right.
Let's reduce it down to just the recirculated sort of, air that we will eventually just suffocate on because there's no new air.
Well, and then the end goal of that is, or the end, I mean, I guess we're not even at the end of this, but it does feel like a cultural end in some ways. But these, conversations in public education about the banning of literature and anything that could possibly make any child feel even remotely. I mean, it's like, okay, well, so no, we're not going to teach history now. No young white person can understand. Yeah.
This is on the right and the left.
They have essentially inherited because sides, of the oppression
are suffering from this sort of vacuum of new information and the capacity to shove aside anything that is problematic or feels like an obstacle.
But it's related to that, right? Like that same level of control and like the gaslighting around, woke culture and I mean, it's just.
By the way, that might be the one both sides that I actually agree with. Most both sidesing, I'm like, no. But then that where I'm like, yes, both. The
fringes of
spectrum.
Both. Yeah.
The whole political spectrum does not want to feel uncomfortable. They do not want to be. They do not want to have truth, like capital T truth, like real truth and real meaningfulness revealed to them because it is painful. Again, I go back to that idea where I'm just like, it really was painful for me to. It still is to like have real meaningful, challenging things in front of me because I've been raised in this. In a world where it's like good vibes only, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I think one side of that equation is responding to who is in control of the conversation, right? And then the other side of the equation is responding to this is political expediency, and I think there's a way to have that conversation in a way that, it's like, I mean, especially your agenda and the way that you, I think are talking about.
Who, me?
Yeah, talking about you now. The way that you're talking about engaging with audiences isn't about, intentionally creating pain in an audience. It's about trusting an audience enough to believe that they have the critical thinking skills and, the ability to really engage with content and figure out, not every character in a movie needs to be punished at the end so that that they were wrong.
Right.
In fact, if you do punish them every time, then how are you going to know how to engage with that person when you come out? Because there's no movie set around you trying to tell you
Yeah. And there aren't any, there's increasingly with this very well greased sort of machine of the consumer content, audiovisual content, there's increasingly less and less problems in like the fractures and in music, in television and film, and even in literature. I mean, everything is sort of it doesn't fail. Mm-hmm. There isn't the same sort of failure that we see everywhere around us that is actually that light getting in, that is the thing, sort of like it is essentially the new ideas essentially are able, because the form has fractured, and increasingly everything we see is a perfect sort of it reproduces a template, and it's not there's no deficit in it, and the particular kind of deficit is really important, a particular kind of failure, and
Yeah, and in a very Pavlovian way, content, capital C content, pushes conditions you to be uncomfortable with any kind of conflict or any kind of whether it's conflict in your films, whether it's singing about grief, right? These kind of negative things. It conditions you to push yourself away from that and not have the full range of emotional and existential experiences that are open to you as a human, and just kind of puts a lot of people into little veal cages.
Or engaging. I mean, think about the way that we engage with content in the world and the arts and culture when we're young, but before we've have established these conditions of our opinions and this sort of thing. And I mean, we're sort of taking it all in, and we sort of accept something on its terms.
Right.
And then we think about those terms, and everything is equally valuable. Sure, we start to associate ourselves in particular avenues, and we form opinions and this kind of stuff, but all of it has value as stimuli. And that is something that we lack too, as we age and culturally. So as the nation ages, and the global north and the world,
we're right at the end of the show. I just have one kind of last question. I don't know how answerable it is, but talking about being misfits and that opening up maybe some space for you to start creating or start thinking critically about the world. I'm wondering, in each of your lives, where do you think that space started to creep in? At what point in your lives, in your childhoods or teenage years?
I mean, I grew up as a competitive figure skater, and I started figure skating in Fort McMurray, Alberta, Canada, when I was 8, and I competed until I was 19, and then I became professional for 3 years. So I had there's another equivalent between mine and Emily's upbringing and all of this sort of unorthodox, new age religious sort of space that is very unique. I grew up in a ice rink, in an
he only went to school for half a day kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that essentially I'm already a misfit because I don't know any other, particularly
Right.
male figure skaters. And it was a very strange sort of occupation with a lot of time to think. And so I it sort of crept into that cold, empty building.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I would say like elementary school. I mean, I think that, and I really can't say enough. I mean, there were obviously like, some really big, fissures in the whole system that I, was raised in, but certainly, I mean, the woman who ran our school, it was just incredibly diverse, socioeconomically, racially, and we were all just individual, that was my experience there. I can't speak for everyone, but we have reconnected as adults, a lot of us, and it was a really special place, I think, where all of us felt, we knew we didn't go to like regular school, so maybe we were misfits of the larger system, but I just feel really lucky to have been able to have had that experience, because art, I think, really was, I mean, our school sport was ballet, and we spent a huge amount of time just like playing outside with each other because we were allowed to do that. So the most structured things we would ever do were like go to Latin class and listen to Ray Bradbury on tape. It was like, I mean, it was just a wild time. So I think I just got really lucky to have been able to engage with like, just such a non-traditional educational experience. And I think that honestly, that floated me through public education in, as, junior, middle school and high school. That was like, much more kind of traditional thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then where did the ambition to make things creep in? Especially if, Rick, if you are figure skating, right? At what point does your ambition, like, and I don't mean this in like an occupational sense. I just mean that desire to create coalesce in you.
I mean, I saw certain work, whether it was Cassavetes or Tarkovsky, or listened to certain music, that I found a home in, and I wanted to exist and contend with that space of both belonging and disruption that sort of liberated me.
But you could have not, right? That's the thing.
But I was I was desperate. I always joke that somebody, in the past, somebody asks a similar sort of question, and I go, just desperation drives it. It is my ambition, because I have it. It's necessary. It's like a scaffolding. It gives me something to interact with and hold on to, and I have some value in the fucking world.
Yeah.
So,
what about you, Emily?
I mean, again, I think I always was wanting it to be a part of my life, because I think I had that really good shot in the arm when I was a kid, and then kind of drifted away to it. I always found myself like adjacent to people making art when I was in college or afterwards. And I don't know. I mean, I think it was, I'm not going to give you like full credit, but I really do think that, I was looking for someone to support me in giving myself, again, permission to like really engage. And, some part of it.
That's when I got hired.
That's what he got hired as my partner. But like we have this band, together, and it's like I needed that partnership with another human in order to make music in that way, and certainly to kind of break through that wall that I had created for myself around what that looks like. So yeah.
Thanks, both of you, for joining me today.
Sure.
Thank you. It was such a great conversation.
Yeah, it was a real delight. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.